All right, so let's actually hop into Android Studio. It's installed, I've opened it for the first time, and I have a couple options here, including starting with a new Android Studio project, opening an existing project, checking out a project from version control, meaning getting one from GitHub or another source, profiling or debugging a project, importing something from Eclipse or Gradle or another source, and importing an Android code sample. There's also this configure button down here, which has loads of different options. We are going to start by creating a new Android Studio project. Now, almost always we'll just use the empty activity. We have a series of different topics here, including Wear OS, TV, Android Auto, and then phone and tablet, which is what we'll be using for this class. And we have basic activity, empty, bottom navigation, and all kinds of different other things. I like to work with empty activity. I'm going to hit next. It's going to ask me for the name of my application, so I'll call this My First Android App. And then the package name reflects a domain that I own, and then dot, and then My First Android App. So it's a weird kind of inversion. This is part of the industry standard, and unfortunately it's just an odd phrasing that they use. But I own CameronBuckley.org. So my package name is org.cameronbuckley.myfirstandroidapp. If you own mobiledesigns.com, you would put com.mobiledesigns.myfirstandroidapp. So change this around to match, you don't have to own a domain. Probably just putting org and then your first name, last name is a safe bet. And you can always buy that website later if you blew up as a developer. We have a save location. I'm just choosing the default here. And then we have the language, which we're going to work with Kotlin in this class. Below that, we have the minimum API level, meaning what version of Android is the minimum that they need in order to run our app. At 5.0, using Android 5.0, our app will run on 85% of devices. If I was using Android Pie 9.0, it would run on less than 1% of devices. So this is where we can kind of make some decisions. Now, generally what we're working with, 4.4, 5.0, that range, everything we use will be fine. We don't have to worry about it. There is this Help Me Choose button, which will go through kind of some steps you can think about. But frankly, we're using very basic technology in our apps. We're not using anything crazy that's required to be on Android 9.0 or something like that. So we're going to focus on Android 5.0 for now, and I'm going to hit Finish, and it will build my app. Now, I may get a couple errors whenever this starts, and that's fine. But what it's basically doing is building a file structure for me to work with in. So I just need to wait for that to finish. Okay, and I got an error, and that's okay. I can ignore that for now. But basically, it's going to open up the Android Studio interface. And there's quite a bit going on here with this interface, and what we want to focus on is getting this connected to GitHub. So we have it open, we've made our first project, we're going to connect this to GitHub and push it to GitHub. Now we've talked in other classes and in this class briefly about GitHub, but basically GitHub is a website that hosts repositories, which are basically projects, and those repositories save multiple versions of a single project. So I could have one that's called My First Android App, and that repository would hold every version of My First Android App that I've ever built. GitHub is largely used for collaboration and things like that, big teams working together, and probably every piece of software you've used in the last 10 years has a GitHub page or has a private GitHub page so you can't find it, but it's using GitHub in some way. GitHub is just this massive, massive database of all of these different software projects. So we're going to push, meaning send our projects to GitHub. Once we push them to GitHub, if I move to a new computer or to my friend's laptop or something, I can clone, meaning I can take that project from the cloud, from GitHub, and pull it onto my computer. So I can clone from GitHub and I can push to GitHub, meaning send my changes, pushing and committing to GitHub. There's a lot of other terminology like pulling and branching and things like that just we're not going to get into in this class. That is really like a computer science kind of department there. So I have all of these different repositories here, and what we're going to do is we're going to link this GitHub account, which you were supposed to make, to our Android Studio. Now, if you are on Windows, you are going to have to install Git, meaning there's a program called Git. You're going to need to visit git-scm.com and download it and install it. I can't walk you through the install process, but basically you'll download it, install it. There's a really easy setup that you can do. But once it's working, and it's like a little command line application, meaning it runs in like command line and not like with an actual graphical user interface. Once Git is installed, you should be good to go. And you can actually, if you search how to add Android Studio project to GitHub, the first result that you'll find is this Stack Overflow article, and this will be posted in our Blackboard page. Goes through a whole process here. So you need to get GitHub installed, get Git installed, and then GitHub is the actual website. We're going to go into our Android Studio, and we can actually go in Mac, we're going to go Android Studio Preferences, but on Windows, you'll do File Settings. So Preferences, I'm going to go down to Version Control, and I'm going to click Git. I'll switch back over here, and I want to click the Test to test the path there. And for me, should be good, executed successfully. So just double check that it auto-detected everything correctly. Again, if you're on Mac or if you're on Linux, I believe every Linux distribution has Git installed by default. That's probably an assumption, but it should be installed by default, and Mac has Git installed by default. So I'm going to hop back over here. So then I'm going to go to File, Version Control, GitHub. So within this same page, I'm going to go to GitHub. And I already have my account on here, but you would click this plus right here to add your account. You would sign in with your username and password. And now my account is on here. And then we are good to go. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm back on here. I'm going to go up to VCS at the top of my screen. If you're on Windows, it would say VCS just on this top bar. And I'm going to import into version control. We have a bunch of different options here. We're going to share the project on GitHub. Okay. So I'm going to click Share Project on GitHub. Should log in. I'm going to type in my repository's name. So I'm going to do my first Android app. I can either make it private or not. If you're sharing this with me and it's an assignment that you're turning in, you need to make sure it's public and not private. The remote origin is fine. We can give it a little description. See me testing the Android Studio linking capabilities. And I hit share. Now this is an error that you're going to get. Repository names need to be letters with dashes. So typically it's like this instead of spaces. Hit share. And it says creating GitHub. What do you want to send? I just say, okay, this is fine. This is where I would put a commit message, meaning I would describe my changes. Since this is the first time, my initial commit, meaning my initial changes, is what I'm adding. So I'm going to hit add, and it's going to push to GitHub. I can see that down here at the bottom of the screen, and it might take a little bit. Okay, it's successfully shared the project. If I click this, it should open up the link directly, and there we go. We have our link. We are good to go. I have this linked in, and I would just share this as my assignment. This is what I would turn in. And what's great is that I would be able to clone this at any time back into my version of Android Studio and check it out. So that is how, very simply, you set up Android Studio to be connected to GitHub. At any time, if I wanted to commit my changes, I can push and pull those things. And we'll get into that later. We can update the project right here where it will, convert this and push it back up to GitHub. So that's the whole process start to finish.